So we continue our discussion, Brachos Daf Hey, Talmud Brachos, page 5, in which we've been examining the issues around human suffering. And in the previous portion, we discussed the nature of our relationship with Torah. And we connected that with the idea of human suffering, which is that inherent in giving us the gift of Torah comes along with that the gift of uncertainty, of ignorance, and meaning you can only give a teaching to somebody who doesn't know the teaching, but on the other hand, it is a profound statement of trust that the person has the capacity to absorb the teaching. And so suffering goes hand in hand with ignorance and limitation, darkness, not having a sense of meaning. Practically speaking, if I know the meaning of my pain, then I can endure it much better. Classic case in point, parents in the hospital who heard their children crying were experiencing high levels of distress at listening to their children crying. However, when doctors told them that the crying actually helps the child to relieve their pain and is good for their blood pressure and whatever, the parents' anxiety went down noticeably. So essentially, the experience of suffering goes very much to the heart of the amount of a person's awareness and understanding about what's happening to them. And so we, by helping us understand that the gift of Torah requires also ignorance, we can help to kind of make a little bit more sense out of our suffering. The Talmud continues, I think, sewing these two themes together. Omar Rava Omar Rav Huna v'yiteimer Rav Chisda. Rava taught in the name of Rav Huna, or maybe Rav Chisda. Imroa Adam sheyisurin boyin alav. If a person sees that suffering is coming upon him, yifashfesh b'masov, he should examine his deeds. Shenemar, as the Torah, as the Megillas Eicha, Ecclesiastes states, Nach besod rachenu v'nach kora. Let us examine our ways and search them out, research them. Pishpesh b'masav u'matzah, if he examined his deeds and found something lacking, Yasa teshuva, let him repent. Shenemar v'noshuva Hashem, as the verse there in Eicha in Ecclesiastes continues, and we would return to God. Pishpeish v'lo matzah, if he examined his deeds and didn't find anything wrong, Yitla b'vitl Torah, he should assume, not the best word, he should associate it with a lack of Torah study. What did you say? He should attribute it to a lack of Torah study. Shenemar ashrei hagever asher tiasrenu ka umitorascha tlamdenu. Praiseworthy is the person who is whom God tries and teaches him of his Torah. Vim tolav lo matzah, and if he attributed to the study of Torah, to the lack of study of Torah, and didn't find cause even with regards to his Torah study, v'yadua, so it is known, sheyisurin shel ahavahein, that this is suffering out of love. This is suffering given by God out of love, which we won't deal with today. So, if a person sees suffering, he should examine his deeds. So, first of all, picture in your mind a person who is suffering, and pishpeish v'lo matzah, he examines his deeds and finds nothing wrong. What would you say about that person?
Very arrogant
Very arrogant. Exactly. Right.
No, maybe he's ignorant, something wrong.
Or ignorant.
That's why the Torah helps.
Right.
Because if you learn Torah,
Exactly.
then you'll learn.
Exactly. A person who says he examines his deeds and finds no room for improvement, that person has right there, exactly there is the problem. How did they say in Yiddish? Dort is the Hund begraben. That's where the dog is buried. Exactly there, that pish pish v'lo matzah. And there's nothing wrong, the Talmud continues, there's nothing wrong with finding something to improve. There's always teshuvah. There's always the idea of returning to a better self. If a person, and this is exactly what the Talmud is saying perhaps, is that if a person can examine their deeds and find nothing wrong, then there is a prescription. They need to study Torah. They need to learn more about what a person can strive to, what a person can accomplish in life. And by the way, we can interpret this on a very basic level, which says that probably, as we said, he's ignorant. Probably that person is doing things wrong without knowing any better. But there's another interpretation, which is that the person is arrogant. And not that they are doing things wrong out of ignorance, it's that they don't have the humility to understand that even when a person is perfect, there is still something more to aspire to. Meaning that the idea of Torah, and this is I think also a theme that we talked about in the past, the Torah is not a prescription, is not a mass-produced prescription. The Torah is an individual teaching for every person. And in order to properly, the study of Torah means that you take the Torah to heart and you see that now I learned the Torah, you got to learn it again. Because the way I learned it yesterday is not the way I'm going to learn it today. And what was good for me yesterday, it may be good, but it's not necessarily good today. Yeah?
Two things. Suffering, is that suffering to the person directly to themselves? Or is that suffering like we're in a pandemic, so everybody's suffering? Or is there suffering through extension to a family member? Like what is defined as suffering in the teaching that's going to
Right, so let's look at the text. He says, that was number one. You had number two?
Yeah, number two was when you're examining your own deeds, did the Chachamim have a preference of how you should examine them?
Okay, so the two questions are, what is the definition of suffering? Is there kind of a global experience of suffering, or are we talking about an individual experience of suffering? And what's the procedure for examining one's deeds? So, let's look at the text. Imroa adam sheyisurin boyin alav. If a person sees or perceives that suffering is coming to him, and the commentaries note there's a little bit of an awkwardness in this text. It doesn't say if a person is suffering. If a person sees that suffering is coming to him, which suggests that suffering need not be objective. Suffering is a subjective experience, which is imroa adam. If a person sees themselves as suffering, but not even as suffering, but yisurim boyin alav, if he sees them coming down the road, which again is the idea that the very existence of anxiety is something that we should do something with. By the way, specific to your question about this global idea of suffering, the definition of anxiety is being afraid of something which hasn't happened yet. So perhaps that's what the Talmud is talking here specifically about anxiety. If a person perceives within themselves that suffering is coming down the road, right? So this sense of a lack of stability and a lack of safety is again mirroring this idea that I shouldn't feel spiritually secure, stable, and safe. I should always recognize that spiritually I need to be on alert. I can't be complacent and say that just because yesterday I was safe, therefore tomorrow I was safe. I made it through the corona yesterday, I probably will make it through the corona tomorrow. Maybe not such a well-advised approach.
So it's not an objective fact.
It's not an objective fact, it's subjective experience. But he's saying that so the way I'm kind of interpreting it is to say that anxiety is a kind of application of the term past performance does not necessarily indicate future results.
I have to comment on this because I treat this. Anxiety is typically a mismatch of expectations with observations.
Right.
And when there is a mismatch, that delta is what usually provides.
So a mismatch between observation and expectation. So the observation, for example, is?
Observation is like this pandemic.
Right. I see a pandemic around me.
The expectation of the pandemic, my perception is, oh my God, I may imminently contract something, versus another person will be like, I take the appropriate precautions.
Right.
And I may not contract, or I will not contract.
Right. Now, to a certain extent, there is a healthy degree of anxiety in which a person should take that on and say, well, something bad might happen, therefore I have to do something. And I think that's exactly what the Talmud is saying. If a person feels anxious and feels unstable and is worried, that is a healthy mentality that a person should have, which is that they should realize that just because I was safe yesterday, just because I'm okay now, or just because, meaning that this is a healthy approach to being proactive about growth and about safety and about continually addressing that. And that means that, again, something which I learned and I thought I understood last year, I may understand it differently today, which is a general approach to life. And it also suggests that the experience of, and again here, I'm glad you brought up that question, because here we're talking about anxiety and not actual suffering. We'll talk later about the actual experience of bad things having happened to me. Now, as far as how a person should examine their deeds, well, I suppose a person could think about the things that they did. A person should do this every day, at the end of the day. Think over the things that they did, and think, did I do it correctly? Did I not do it correct? Could I have done it better? Can I do it better tomorrow? So perhaps it's hard to be mefashfesh b'masov, to examine one's deeds over the course of an entire life. And perhaps there's the answer, is that if I feel that I can't examine my deeds over the course of my whole life, maybe pishpesh v'lo matzah, I thought back as far as I could, I didn't get very far. Okay, so then it's also possible. Then we go back to the difference between arrogance and ignorance. So go to study Torah, and you'll find a way in which you can improve yourself without necessarily needing to negate something that you did wrong.